I got pregnant with my boss's child after quitting my job. As the CEO's chief secretary, Wei Yan had always been diligent and dedicated, known as a role model in the industry. However, she accidentally found herself pregnant with her boss's child. The sky began to lighten, and the lingering intimacy in the bedroom gradually faded. The man's gaze glided over the woman's smooth back before he detached himself without a second thought and stepped into the bathroom. He quickly changed into a silver-gray suit and left the room expressionlessly. At that moment, his cold demeanor was worlds apart from how he had seemed in bed last night, when he appeared ready to destroy her. Of course, even last night, lost in desire, his expression hadn't been particularly warm. The moment he got out of bed, Wei Yan woke up but pretended to be asleep. Her throat felt dry. Just as he was about to step out of the room, she whispered, "Goodbye, CEO Leng." Ling Yiting didn't seem to hear her, his footsteps pausing for a moment but without any response as he went downstairs. His indifference made Wei Yang smirk faintly. For years ago, she had joined Ling Corporation as an intern. On her first day, she had accompanied Ling Yiting to a social event, where he was set up by someone, and she became his remedy for intoxication. The story that followed was cliched and unremarkable. Their relationship, that of CEO and chief secretary, had continued until today. Although Ling Yiting hadn't said a word, she knew they likely wouldn't have another chance to meet. She quickly got up, packed her things, and went downstairs, where she found Ling Yiting's assistant, Song Ji, sitting on the sofa in the living room. Song Ji sat upright, wearing gold-framed glasses, with a laptop on his lap, his fingers flying over the keys, his expression serious and focused. When he heard her approach, he turned to look at her and adjusted his glasses. His gaze deepened as he noticed the suitcase in Wei Yang's hand, but he quickly concealed his surprise. They had worked together for years and had a decent rapport. Wei Yang greeted him naturally and sat down across from Song Ji. Only then did Song Ji move his laptop aside and hand her a set of prepared documents, clearing his throat as he said, "Secretary Wei, this is from CEO Leng." Wei Yang took it and glanced at it, remaining silent for a long time. Her eyelashes trembled slightly, and she appeared somewhat fragile. Thinking she was upset, Song Ji lowered his voice, "Secretary Wei, if you have any other needs, you can mention them. As long as it's not too excessive, CEO Leng will definitely accommodate you given your relationship." Relationship? To Ling Yiting, she was merely a tool for release. For a tool, one might feel a twinge of nostalgia, but it was still to be discarded when necessary. Saying relationship seemed to her a bit presumptuous. Wei Yang returned to her senses and smiled faintly. "CEO Leng is truly generous." Her tone was somewhat flat, and Song Ji couldn't help but feel astonished. Wei Yang seemed calm, as if she had expected that Ling Yiting would end things. After 4 years with Ling Yiting, now that they were parting ways, he had given her 3 properties, including the villa she was currently in, along with cash and other assets, amounting to at least 100 million. Not to mention what she had received over the years. Even if she married someone randomly, that money would be enough to ensure her comfort for the rest of her life. Wei Yang was indeed a tough character, and even he felt a pang of jealousy when he saw what Ling Yiting had given her. Most women would be overjoyed to receive such an exorbitant severance gift, but Wei Yang showed no emotion, even managing to throw a jab at Ling Yiting. Wei Yang took the documents and signed them decisively. Then she pulled out a resignation letter she had prepared earlier and handed it to Song Ji, politely saying, "Thank you, Assistant Song." Song Ji understood. Given her position, it was normal for her to leave Ling Yiting and resign from the company. He accepted it, saying, "You're too polite, Secretary Wei." Wei Yang then smiled lightly, "I won't be Secretary Wei anymore, just call me Wei Yan." Song Ji quickly got up to leave. Wei Yan watched his retreating figure and gently touched her still flat abdomen. Now that Ling Yiting had lost interest in her, she needed to find a way to extricate herself. She was hiding a huge secret and couldn't let him find out. Chapter 2, Finding a Way to Make Him Tired of Her. Song Ji organized the documents and returned to the car. Ling Yiting was in the back seat, leaning against the window with his eyes closed, his expression not looking too good. Hearing the movement, he opened his eyes and glanced at Song Ji coldly. Understanding the cue, Song Ji immediately reported, "I've talked to Wei Yan." Ling Yiting raised an eyebrow. "Wei Yan?" Cough. Song Ji handed him Wei Yang's resignation letter. "This is Secretary Wei's resignation letter." Ling Yiting opened it and looked at Wei Yang's careful yet formulaic handwriting, the corners of his lips curling into a mocking smile. After a few seconds of silence in the car, he finally spoke. What was her reaction? Songji didn't dare to hide the truth but felt that Wei Yan's response didn't match Ling Yiting's expectations, so he said, of course, she could only accept CEO Ling's arrangement. Secretary Wei is always quite perceptive and even praised how generous CEO Ling is. Ling Yiting fell silent. Songji observed his expression and felt that he was in a bad mood. However, the next moment, he saw Ling Yiting crumple up Wei Yan's neatly written resignation letter and casually toss it into the car's small trash can. He closed his eyes again and said in a bland tone, devoid of emotion, drive. Songji had been with Ling Corporation longer than Wei Yan. When Ling Yiting and Wei Yan first met, he was present but didn't think Ling Yiting treated her any differently. Yet, the boss was the boss, his thoughts hard to decipher, and before long, Ling Yiting had taken her to bed. Everyone assumed Ling Yiting was just playing around, but it was unexpectedly serious. Though he appeared heartless, he was surprisingly devoted, maintaining a little mistress for 4 years. During that time, Ling Yiting had nearly spent every night in Wei Yan's bed. Even Songji couldn't help but wonder if Wei Yan had a chance to marry into the Ling family, only to suddenly receive notification to get rid of her. Get rid of her. It was as if she were a used rag to be discarded. Wei Yan didn't linger at the villa for long. After handling things, she noticed the registration time was approaching, so she stuffed her suitcase into the trunk and drove directly to the hospital. Her best friend, Yao Yao, worked as a doctor in the obstetrics and gynecology department at the Central City Hospital. Once she arrived, she went straight to Yao Yao's office. Yao Yao, with a slightly babyish face, conducted a round of checks on her. Only after that did her expression soften as she looked at the test results and said, "Don't worry, my godson is very healthy." Wei Yan, who had felt a bit anxious, finally revealed a genuine smile. "How do you know it's not a goddaughter?" "I like girls." "I like goddaughters too." Yao Yao laughed, handing her the test results. Wei Yan had an interest in medicine and had read many medical books, so she could understand the results herself. If it weren't for her family's financial difficulties, and if pursuing a medical career didn't take so long to yield a stable income, she might have also become a doctor like Yao Yao. Yao Yao couldn't help but advise her, although the baby is strong, you still need to take it easy. Intimacy can be risky. Wei Yan's gaze remained on the test results, but her smile faded a bit. "Don't worry, I won't anymore. Ling Yiting is tired of me, and he gave me a large sum of money. Starting today, I'm free." The baby in her womb was already over a month old. She had never expected to find herself in the situation of being pregnant before marriage, yet here she was, unexpectedly expecting. Having nearly drowned as a child left her with severe uterine issues. If she lost this baby, she might not have another chance to conceive. Wei Yan had considered whether Ling Yiting's recent clinginess indicated that he felt something more for her. But she quickly realized that he was simply tired of her. He likely viewed it as getting full value from an investment. Having spent the money, he would want to use it a few more times to avoid feeling cheated. And Ling Yiting would absolutely not allow her to have his child. Even if Ling Yiting didn't tire of her, she would find a way to make him feel that way. Chapter 3, He*s Drunk. Wei Yan had long made her plans. She would sell off the real estate and other things that Ling Yiting had given her over the years. Once everything was processed, she would return to her hometown to give birth. She wouldn't come back to this place again in her lifetime. Her goodbye that morning was actually a farewell for good. Anshan was Ling Yiting's territory. Even if she left Ling Corporation, she couldn't be sure he wouldn't find out she secretly had his child in the future. She had no doubt that the Ling family was capable of anything, including silencing her. So she couldn't stay in this city. For now, she was temporarily living in a hotel. Having barely rested the night before, she fell asleep as soon as she entered the hotel. She slept through the night until her phone rang, waking her up. Without checking the caller ID, she answered the phone, only to suddenly awaken when she heard the male voice on the other end. She was puzzled. Song assistant. Songji felt awkward as well. Having just dealt with her that morning, he now had to call her back. He couldn't fathom what Ling Yiting was really thinking. While his unpredictability was part of his character, it had never been applied to such matters before. However, at that moment, Ling Yiting was drunk, his brow furrowed with irritation, eyes tightly shut, impatiently tugging at his tie. Song Ji knew that Ling Yiting was completely intoxicated. He had been nitpicking just a moment ago. Hearing him call Wei Yan, he didn't stop him, clearly allowing it. Reluctantly, Song Ji said to Wei Yan, "Secretary Wei, CEO Ling is drunk. Please come to the usual place to pick him up." Wei Yan quickly realized this was Ling Yiting's intention. She couldn't help but let out a sardonic smile. He had said he wanted to end things, yet he didn't even say it to her face, sending an assistant to handle it instead. Wei Yang had a good temper, but that didn't mean she had no temper at all. Lazily nestled in her blankets, she replied politely, "Song assistant, you have the wrong number. I've already resigned. There are many capable secretaries in the department on standby. You can contact someone else." After saying that, she hung up the phone. Listening to the busy tone on the line, Song Ji turned to look at Ling Yiting. Ling Yiting had opened his eyes, his dark and deep gaze fixated on his phone with a cold glint. Song Ji was close enough to hear the beeping on the phone clearly. Since joining Ling Yiting, Wei Yang had never lost her temper. She was adaptable, able to anticipate his thoughts without him saying a word. Regardless of what he did or said, even his occasional quirky interests in bed, she always cooperated 100%. Yet this seemingly eternally patient, almost robotic good-natured person had just hung up on Song Ji. Ling Yiting's expression darkened instantly as he said meaningfully, "She's gotten bold." Song Ji could only tentatively ask, "Should I call another secretary for you?" Ling Yiting shot him an impatient glance. Song Ji understood his meaning. The secretaries at Lin Corporation were known for their outstanding work abilities and exceptional looks. Because Wei Yang had been with Ling Yiting, many outsiders unconsciously viewed the secretary department as his harem. In reality, Ling Yiting never touched other women. After hanging up on Song Ji, Wei Yang thought for a moment and took out her phone, calling another chief secretary, Sumai, who lived nearby, to notify her to come. Over the years at Lin Corporation, Sumai had helped her a bit. While they couldn't become good friends due to their professional relationship, it was acceptable to return a favor. Sumai picked up the phone, quickly understanding the unspoken meaning behind Wei Yang's words, and dressed up glamorously, excited to go. She arrived in just a few minutes, and according to the box number Wei Yan provided, she quickly knocked on the door. Seeing her appear, Song Ji was momentarily taken aback, but Sumai didn't notice him, her attention entirely captivated by Ling Yiting. The dim lights in the room made it hard to see Ling Yiting's face, but his chiseled profile was attractive enough to make any woman's heart flutter. His tie had been impatiently tugged loose, and a few buttons on his shirt were undone, revealing his collarbone. The interplay of light and shadow made him irresistibly sexy. Sumai instinctively swallowed hard and cautiously approached, saying, "CEO Lin, Secretary Wei said you're drunk and sent me to take you home." Ling Yiting's icy gaze was terrifying. "Secretary Wei sent you?" Chapter 4, Late Night Visit. Sumai instinctively nodded. Ling Yiting slightly lifted his lips and said, "Get lost." Sumai. Song Ji sighed beside them. Both Ling Yiting and Wei Yang were truly difficult to handle. While the fire here hadn't been extinguished, Wei Yang was pouring oil on it from the other side. It was tough. Sumai stood trembling to the side, looking to Song Ji for help. Song Ji helplessly said, "Are you CEO Ling's secretary or Secretary Wei's? Just do what she tells you. Go back." Sumai felt secretly wronged. Although she was reluctant to give up this opportunity, she quickly left to protect her job. Song Ji cautiously suggested, "CEO Ling, let me take you back." This time, Ling Yiting didn't even give him a glance. Wei Yang was awakened by Song Ji's call and, feeling restless, decided to get some late-night snacks delivered to her hotel room. Recently, she had been feeling hungry more often, though she couldn't eat much each time. Having spent these years by Ling Yiting's side, she had met all sorts of people. That morning, she had contacted an agency to list her house, car, and some designer bags for sale. Since the prices were much lower than market value, the agent had already informed her that many items had sold. The villa she used to share with Ling Yiting also had interested buyers, and the agent scheduled a meeting for her tomorrow. While eating noodles, she was responding to the agent's messages when suddenly someone knocked on her door. Wei Yan wondered, "Is it ready that fast?" "Coming." She stood up and opened the door, only to find no one there. Furrowing her brows, she was about to close the door when suddenly a hand reached in, grabbing her wrist and pulling her out with force. Caught off guard, she was yanked into someone else's embrace, letting out a surprised cry. Looking up in alarm, she only saw the familiar jawline of a man, filled with the distinctive cold fragrance that belonged to him. The next second, she was carried into the room. The man shut the door behind them and pushed her against it. His lips crashed against hers, forcefully kissing her, reeking of alcohol. In an instant. Slap. The man froze, his actions halted. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. But the coldness in his eyes seemed capable of freezing her solid. Wei Yan felt both fear and anger. It wasn't surprising that he could find her here. However, she hadn't expected him to actually show up. Her body tensed as she silently confronted him. CEO Leng, barging into a single woman's room in the middle of the night to force a kiss is not very gentlemanly. Leng Yiting looked down at her, taking in every subtle expression on her face. After a while, he remarked with curiosity, "Are you angry?" After 4 years of following him, she had rarely shown anger. It was somewhat refreshing for him. Any woman should be angry when kissed by a stranger, Wei Yan collected herself, pursing her lips. She then added coldly, "CEO Leng, I've signed according to your wishes. As a businessman, you should understand the importance of keeping promises." Strangers with daily intimate contact in bed. Leng Yiting gripped her chin. "I didn't notice before that Secretary Wei had such a sharp tongue." Wei Yan chuckled lightly. "Sorry, I'm like a hedgehog. Having a sharp tongue was just an instinct in the face of danger." Leng Yiting squinted slightly before saying, "After signing, you immediately submitted your resignation and sold off your properties. From this sequence of events, it seems I'm the one who has been schemed against by Secretary Wei." So, he knew about her selling her house. She hadn't expected him to pay attention to such matters. Wei Yan was aware that Leng Yiting never looked back. Once he made a decision, he always executed it thoroughly. He might not genuinely want to sleep with her again. It was likely that her indifference was making him feel somewhat embarrassed. Seeing him emotionally affected because of her was rare, and she let out a self-deprecating smile. "CEO Leng, you don't need to feel embarrassed. Regardless of how things played out, the end result is that I'm the one you discarded." Wei Yan clenched her fingers, her body tense. She averted her gaze, no longer looking at Leng Yiting, her tone growing even more indifferent. "It's been 4 years. CEO Leng is tired of me, and I'm tired of him too. You're great in bed, but everyone ultimately craves novelty. No matter how good, it eventually becomes dull. I'm not young anymore. Selling these old things and going home to get married is quite normal, isn't it?" Chapter 5, he really has that serious problem. Just like that, his current efforts to distance himself from her were likely because he was about to marry into one of the 4 great families, the Mu family. They each had their own paths to follow. Leng Yiting didn't expect to hear her say that and raised an eyebrow. Marry? In his mind, it seemed he had never considered that she would marry someone else. Even if they weren't together, he couldn't picture her with another man. Wei Yang hadn't planned to marry with a child, but to convince him, she nodded. Of course. Leng Yiting's lips, which had always been cold, tightened slightly. The emotions hidden in his deep-set eyes seemed to contain ice, threatening to freeze her whole being. She could sense that he was angry, but the more angry he became, the less clear his expression was. He said with a hint of amusement, "I didn't expect Secretary Wei to have already arranged her backup plans. That's thanks to CEO Leng's training. You taught me to have a habit of making plan Bs, Wei Yan replied, looking up at him with a smile. CEO Leng, this isn't like you. Even after parting ways, you still come to disturb me in the middle of the night. I might misunderstand that you've fallen for me. Leng Yiting smirked. You have quite the imagination. He didn't look at her again and turned to leave. Silence returned to the room. Wei Yang's face turned pale, her body feeling weak as she slid down against the door, sitting on the floor. Her back was drenched in cold sweat. Not sitting for long, she only had one thought in her mind: to avoid complications, she couldn't stay in an city any longer. Wei Yan quickly grabbed her phone and bought the earliest high-speed train ticket for the next day, then started packing her things to leave. Just as she had packed about half, her phone rang. Hearing the ringtone, her heart skipped a beat, sensing something bad. Furrowing her brow, she picked up the phone and felt regret for not blocking all contacts related to Leng Yiting earlier when she saw Song Ji's name. With a frown, she answered the call. Song Ji spoke in a formal tone. Secretary Wei, Secretary Su was originally going to take over your position, but she was injured in a car accident last night and is unable to work at the company. We need you to temporarily return until she recovers and can take over. Anger swelled in Wei Yan's chest, making her tremble slightly as she gritted her teeth. There are so many capable people in the secretary department, anyone can take over. Song Ji continued, our chief secretary position at Ling S is not something just anyone can fill. Digging her nails into her palm, Wei Yan was furious and desperately struggled. But I've already resigned. Song Ji's tone remained calm. Secretary Wei, CEO Leng has approved your resignation letter, yet it doesn't can't. You are still an employee at Ling S. If you leave without notice and cause significant losses to the company, we have grounds to sue you. Check your WeChat. She suddenly received a message on WeChat. Wei Yan clicked to open it, only to see several contractual clauses that Song Ji had sent. Ling S contracts were always rigorous, yet fair they wouldn't use them to make things difficult for employees. Wei Yan remembered these clauses, but she never thought that Ling Yiting would apply them to her. Whether the losses were significant or not was ultimately up to Ling Yiting to decide. The cold, written words of the contract conveyed a silent threat and warning. It was clear that Ling Yiting intended to make things difficult for her. Wei Yan tightened her grip on her phone, her fingers turning slightly white as she remained silent for a long time. Song Ji felt some sympathy and finally sighed, saying, Secretary Wei, CEO Leng is just upset right now. If you can calm him down, maybe he'll feel better. You'll still need to work tomorrow, so get some rest. Wei Yan looked at her half-packed belongings, which seemed hurried and chaotic, like a joke. Chapter 6, Disfavored. She didn't sleep at all that night. She called Sumai, who stuttered on the phone, and Wei Yang knew the car accident was a lie. Ling Yiting's anger was real. Wei Yang felt that Ling Yiting didn't genuinely want her to continue working. He probably wanted her to leave, but when she complied too well and left too readily, he felt unsatisfied without her causing a scene to cling to him. Feeling low on energy and worried that makeup might be bad for the baby, she decided to go to the office without any makeup. After all, she was someone who had been by Ling Yiting's side. Everyone in the company knew her. Usually, she would wear exquisite makeup and high heels, but today, in her simple and plain outfit with a bare face, she drew glances, appearing to possess a frail kind of beauty. No wonder she had been able to keep Ling Yiting's attention for 4 years even without makeup. She was beautiful. Upon entering the company, Wei Yan glanced at Ling Yiting's work schedule, ensuring everything was well organized. Ling Yiting arrived late, just in time for the meeting, radiating a low-pressure atmosphere that made everyone uneasy. She stood behind the conference room door waiting, but he didn't even look at her as he walked straight into the meeting. The meeting lasted a long time, and during it, Wei Yan felt hungry and went to the pantry to grab some small pastries before returning to the conference room. Finally, when the meeting adjourned, Ling Yiting stood up and, as he walked past her, suddenly his gaze turned even colder. His serious and indifferent tone pierced through the room. Secretary Wei, are you ignoring the dress code of the secretary department just because you've been here for a long time? The secretary department was one of the company's representations. Each person had an annual clothing allowance of over 10,000 yuan, with high standards for appearance. No one around dared to breathe. Everyone wondered if Secretary Wei had actually managed to annoy CEO Leng for the first time. Wei Yan pursed her lips and hung her head in silence, enduring the shame in the eyes of her colleagues. No matter how adept she was at handling relationships, she was still involved in this. Having fallen out of favor as chief secretary, many were eagerly watching the drama unfold. Ling Yiting snorted coldly and turned back to his office. Wei Yan followed slowly behind him and waited for him to discuss matters with company executives for an hour or two before finally going in to deliver a cup of coffee. After a long day, Ling Yiting, who had also slept late the night before, looked somewhat fatigued as he leaned back in his chair with his eyes half closed. As she set the coffee down, Wei Yan's fingers lightly pressed against his temple, giving him a gentle massage. For several minutes, she focused on helping him relax, and neither of them spoke. Only when the furrow in his brow eased did she stop and stand by, looking as if she had something to say but hesitated. Ling Yiting turned his head slightly and saw her with her lashes lowered, standing with her face slightly turned. From this angle, she seemed somewhat fragile, as if she had been wronged. He actually wanted to bully her a bit. Seeing her without makeup was rare. He suddenly recalled the day she joined the company, naive and fresh-faced. Now, 4 years later, she still appeared without makeup, but her face had learned to conceal true emotions. Ling Yiting pulled her over, his fingers tracing her face as he asked coolly, "What do you want to say?" Wei Yang obediently sat on his lap. "CEO, I was startled last night and my attitude was poor. I apologize. Having been able to stay by your side for 4 years is already a huge blessing for me, and I don't dare to think of anything else. If you feel my attitude was inappropriate, feel free to reprimand me." She looked up at him with soft eyes. "I hope that, considering I've been with you for 4 years, you won't hold this against me and will let me go afterward." With his privileged status and strong personality, he wouldn't tolerate being defied. Wei Yang tried her best to keep her attitude humble. She was ready to give in if he thought it wasn't satisfying enough and wanted to take advantage of her, so be it. In the end, it was still him once or 100 times, it made no difference. As long as he would let her go, she was willing to accept it. However, upon hearing her words, Ling Yiting's previously pleasant expression suddenly darkened. His gaze turned icy and sharp, shattering the once harmonious atmosphere. He pushed her off his lap. Wei Yang fell to the floor. Looking at her bewildered expression, Ling Yiting said coldly, "You really think highly of your own appeal." Wei Yang couldn't help but clench her fists. What a jerk! She was unaware of how petty Ling Yiting could be, but she didn't expect him to be so annoying about this. Wei Yang looked up at him defiantly. "What exactly do you want?" He was the one trying to shake her off, now he was the one looking for trouble. Chapter 7, Forced Socializing. Ling Yiting didn't respond, his icy gaze only said, "Get out." Wei Yang felt a bit deflated. Finally, it was time to leave work. She packed her things and prepared to go. Just then, the real estate agent contacted her, saying a buyer was very satisfied and had arranged to meet after work to sign the contract. As she finished packing, Sungji came out of the office and walked straight to her desk. Wei Yang numbly watched him, and before he could speak, she said, "I have something to do." Sungji pretended not to hear and continued, "Secretary Wei, CEO Lang has a social event and wants you to accompany him." Lowering his voice so only she could hear, he added, "Secretary Wei, you'd better not go against him." Wei Yang gave a self-deprecating smile, feeling bitter, "I have no ability to do that." Ling Yiting could crush her like an ant. She wouldn't dare. Wei Yang turned and went downstairs, messaging the agent to have the buyer sign the contract first and leave the documents for her to sign later. When she reached the parking lot, Ling Yiting was already in the car. Seeing her get in, his expression was indifferent, as if he didn't even see her. Wei Yan wasn't in the mood to flatter him and simply sat quietly in the car. Song Ji, who was driving, sensed the low pressure in the vehicle and didn't dare to say a word. Upon arriving, Wei Yang followed Ling Yiting into the private room, but her heart sank when she saw the partner they were meeting. The man, nearly 50 and surnamed Ding, ran a large company but had a poor reputation, infamous for being a womanizer. During their last cooperation discussion, he had watched her with lewd eyes. However, since she was Ling Yiting's woman, he hadn't dared to make a move. But now Ling Yiting clearly knew what Ding's gaze meant and still brought her along. A chill ran through Wei Yang. Everyone present was cunning. When Ding saw Wei Yang, his eyes lit up. After greeting Ling Yiting, he focused on her. "Secretary Wei, we meet again." Wei Yang maintained a composed expression, smiling politely yet distantly. "Hello, Mr. Ding." She wanted to sit next to Ling Yiting, but Ding made a gesture, and another woman had already taken her spot. Ling Yiting merely accepted the hot towel that the other woman handed him, wiping his hands with extreme elegance, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around them. His tacit approval gave Ding even more confidence. Ding grabbed Wei Yang's wrist, smiling warmly yet suggestively. "Come, Secretary Wei, sit next to me. Don't cling to CEO Lin, can't you see he already has company? Don't be a third wheel." Ling Yiting glanced at her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. In the presence of these people, Wei Yang knew she couldn't provoke any of them. Reluctantly, she sat down beside Ding, but anxiety crept into her heart. Just as she was worried, she suddenly felt a leg under the table bump against hers. Looking up, she saw Ding smiling at her, and his actions under the table grew bolder. He even placed a hand on her thigh, trying to explore further. "Mr. Ding." Wei Yang felt a surge of panic and quickly called out to him. Ding chuckled. "Secretary Wei, what's wrong?" The others at the table continued joking among themselves. as if they hadn't noticed the commotion. Despair surged in Wei Yang's heart. She shifted to the side, discreetly avoiding his hand, and then proactively said, "Let me toast you with this drink." Ding's hand pulled away from under the table, and he picked up the glass, giving her a meaningful look. His hand didn't go lower again, but he kept pouring drink after drink for her. Wei Yan had built up her alcohol tolerance over the years, but her body was different. During pregnancy she soon felt weak and a bit dizzy. She thought she was just drunk, but gradually sensed a slight warmth spreading through her body, accompanied by a familiar discomfort in her lower abdomen. Chapter 8 I Can't Guarantee Your Fate. Wei Yan frowned. This CEO Ding is really shady. He didn't know when he drugged her. CEO Ding looked at her sweaty forehead and flushed cheeks. He was so hooked that he wanted to kill her right there and then. But he carefully glanced at Ling Yeting. Ling Yeting's temper was famous for being fickle. He didn't dare to do it. He just reached out to pull Wei Yan. "Secretary Wei, I see you don't look well. Are you drunk? I'll take you out for some fresh air." Wei Yan struggled hard. "CEO Ding, I can just go to the bathroom and wash my face. You guys eat slowly." She stood up and wanted to leave by herself, but CEO Ding quickly stuck to her. Wei Yan was exhausted and was dragged out by him. She looked at Ling Yeting helplessly, hoping that he could save her. However, Ling Yeting tilted his head slightly, as if he was listening carefully to the woman next to him. Wei Yan's heart sank to the bottom of the valley. She didn't expect that after being with Ling Yeting for 4 years, Ling Yeting would treat her like this when they were about to separate. Perhaps in his eyes, she was sleeping with someone just for money. If it could bring him benefits, why not? Her eyes were a little hot, and she was dragged out of the box by President Ding. Seeing her looking at Ling Yeting, President Ding said beside her, "Secretary Wei, don't look at me. President Ling won't care about you. I'm talking about a business worth tens of billions with President Ling. Can you compare?" President Ding stretched out his hand to wipe Wei Yang's tears, but Wei Yang slightly turned her face away. President Ding continued, "Little darling, don't cry. I'm so heartbroken when you cry. Although I'm not as good looking as President Ling, I will love you. You may be more comfortable with me than with President Ling." When he said the word comfortable, his tone was extremely vulgar. Wei Yang tried to stand still, wiped her tears, and forced a smile. "Boss Ding, do you have a room here? I don't like being outside." Boss Ding didn't expect Wei Yang to agree to it so easily, and was immediately overjoyed. "Yes, yes, yes. Of course. Let's go upstairs and rest." Wei Yan was dragged upstairs by him obediently. As soon as he entered the room, Boss Ding couldn't wait to drag Wei Yang to the bed. Wei Yang turned sideways, and then raised her hand and pinched Boss Ding's arm directly. Boss Ding hadn't reacted to her movements, and suddenly felt his hand numb, and he couldn't lift it up in an instant. His face suddenly became ugly. "Bitch, my hand. What did you do?" At this moment, Wei Yang was extremely glad that she loved to study medicine. She knew clearly where the numbness was in the human body. If she fought with Ling Yeting, she would be cannon fodder in an instant. But Boss Ding looked like he had kidney deficiency. Although he might not be able to compete with him in strength, but he might still have a chance to fight for his cleverness. Wei Yang took the opportunity to break away from his control, stepped back 2 steps, and looked at him coldly. She knew that this matter could not be resolved peacefully. "Playing tricks with me? I will kill you later." President Ding gritted his teeth, looked at her hatefully, and rushed up to slap her with pain in his hands. Wei Yang did not dodge. When his hand fell on her face, she hugged his arm with both hands, and then exerted a little force. Using clever strength, she pulled hard. Crack! A crisp sound. The room suddenly heard President Ding scream like a pig being slaughtered. Wei Yang was exhausted all over, stepped back several steps, and looked at him defensively. "President Ding, I advise you not to move, otherwise I can't guarantee your end." President Ding felt as if his hand was broken by her directly, and he couldn't use any strength at all. He gritted his teeth in hatred. However, at this moment, he didn't dare to really compete with Wei Yan. After playing with women for so many years, this was the first time he suffered such a big loss. Boss Ding's expression was extremely sinister, and he sneered, "She is really worthy of being Ling Yeting's woman, full of thorns." Wei Yan smiled self-deprecatingly, and said slowly, "Boss Ding, I don't want to offend you." She couldn't afford to offend him either. But she still offended him in the end. Wei Yang saw that he didn't plan to touch her again, so she turned around and walked out. She didn't dare to turn her back to him, for fear that he would attack her when she was not paying attention. Until she left the hotel, Wei Yang felt that she was a little unconscious. She felt extremely hot all over and her head was dizzy. The cheek that was slapped was swollen and painful. She walked out with the help of the wall, just wanting to get away from this place as soon as possible, but she fell into the man's arms after just a few steps. Chapter 9. Are you kidding me? She didn't like to cry, but when she smelled the familiar cold fragrance, her nose was still sore. Leng Yeting picked her up directly, and Wei Yang didn't resist. Her hands and feet were weak at this moment, and she couldn't resist if she really wanted to. Until she threw her on the bed, he leaned over and saw her red and swollen face. He looked a little gloomy. You are not very powerful in front of me, but you are beaten in such a short time. The cold fingertips touched her cheek. Wei Yang shrank, turned her head to avoid his hand. A hint of displeasure flashed across his expression. She looked up at him and suddenly smiled. Mr. Leng, we are all adults, why do you have to ask some questions so directly? Leng Yeting's face changed slightly, and he took back his hand and looked at her expressionlessly. Wei Yang seemed to not see his ugly face, and deliberately continued, Boss Leng has taught me for several years, and now he has found me a customer who is so happy. He is really troublesome. Leng Yeting supported her pillow with one hand, looked down at her, and said dangerously, Are you enjoying it? Wei Yang looked at him. After eating too much delicacies from mountains and seas, it tastes good to eat roadside stalls occasionally. I just didn't expect that this boss Ding is good looking but useless. He finished before I even started. While speaking, her fingers slowly stroked his chest. Boss Leng, are you trying to give me a chance to continue? Leng Yeting was so angry that he laughed. You are quite capable. He was really brave. Wei Yang thought he would be so angry that he would slam the door and leave the next second, but she didn't expect. The short skirt on her body was suddenly lifted, and his hand went straight up along her legs. He actually used this method to test whether she was. Wei Yan was like being electrocuted, and she moved back instantly, cursing, Leng Yeting. You bastard! However, she was on the bed at this moment, being pressed under him, and moving around was just thrashing under him. Wei Yan collapsed, looked at him in humiliation, raised her hand and slapped him hard in the face. Par. Leng Yeting's face tilted slightly after being hit, and he turned to look at her with cold eyes. Wei Yan was afraid and angry. Get out. Leng Yeting glanced at her lightly and stood up directly. This room has been opened under Leng Yeting's name for a long time. He occasionally stayed here when he was late for socializing. It was not the first time Wei Yan came with him. He sat down directly on the small sofa in the room, and even flipped through the company documents. Wei Yan curled up against the bed. She felt like there was a fire burning on her body, burning her sanity. She wanted to rush into the bathroom and soak herself in the bathtub, but she thought of the child in her belly. Time passed by minute by minute. Leng Yeting's patience was also running out. The documents in his hand were not turned for a long time. Leng Yeting raised his eyes and saw Wei Yan curled up in the corner, trembling slightly. Her long hair covered her face, and he couldn't see her expression clearly. He felt something was wrong and stood up. When he got closer, he saw that Wei Yang's face was sweaty and red. At this moment, in order to suppress the restlessness in her body, she bit the back of her hand tightly with one hand, and it was bleeding. He walked over quickly and tried to pull her hand away. Let go. Wei Yang didn't give him any reaction. He stretched out his hand and pinched both sides of her cheeks with 2 fingers. She felt pain and was forced to let go. He realized that the back of her hand was already bloody. Leng Yeting was so angry that he laughed. You are quite cruel to yourself. Her consciousness was a little fuzzy at this moment, and she was just subconsciously fighting with her body. Smelling his familiar scent, she subconsciously entangled with him. She leaned forward a little, and her whole body pressed against him, pressing him directly on the bed. Her lips with a bit of blood smell pressed directly against him, blocking his lips eagerly. He raised his eyebrows, lying down and letting her tease him randomly, but soon he felt a pain in his lips, and the woman in his arms began to struggle frantically to push him away. He licked his lips, and tasted the blood without surprise. Are you playing with me? Chapter 10. If you move again, I'll do it to you. As soon as she finished speaking, she pounced on him again. She said no, but she subconsciously got into his arms again. Her hands were random, but it stimulated him to lose control. However, as soon as his hand touched the corner of her clothes, she suddenly pushed it away with great force. Again and again. Leng Yeting fell on the bed, with only dirty words in his mind. Wei Yan's clothes were mostly torn open, her face was covered with sweat, her expression was a little distorted, and there was an indescribable sexiness. The woman was still lying on him and doing whatever she wanted, kissing him and hitting him. Leng Yeting's forehead was throbbing with veins, and he lifted her up. She was stunned for a few seconds on the bed, and the next moment he got up and directly lifted the quilt, wrapping her whole body in the quilt. The little woman in the quilt was still making a fuss. Leng Yeting said fiercely, "If you move again, I'll kill you." He pulled his tie in annoyance. Seeing that it had come to this point, Wei Yan, who clearly wanted it very much but still pushed him away, felt inexplicably depressed. After a few seconds of silence, Leng Yeting's eyes were slightly cold, and he took out his mobile phone to call Song Ji. After hearing about the situation, Song Ji quickly contacted a private doctor to come over. After giving Wei Yang an injection, the people calmed down. Wei Yang shrank in the quilt, with only his head exposed. He had fallen asleep due to exhaustion and looked very obedient. Song Ji looked at Leng Yeting, who was standing at the head of the bed. His clothes were a little messy, and his face was full of unsatisfied desires, and whispered, "Boss Leng, do you need to give it to you?" Leng Yeting didn't even raise his head. Get lost. When Wei Yang woke up the next day, he only felt a dull pain in his head, and the memory of the previous night came back. Wei Yang's lips curled up slightly, and she only said two words faintly, "You deserve it." She flipped through the messages on her phone. The buyer had already signed the contract the night before. She simply washed up and went to the agency to go through the real estate transaction contract. After signing it, she slowly went to the company. The house was purchased by Leng Yeting in full and given to her. The buyer she sold it to also bought it in full. There was no need to go through the loan procedure, so the procedures were much simpler. After she signed, she handed the follow-up to the agency to handle it. She received the house payment from the other party while she was on the way. After counting the zeros on the transfer amount, Wei Yang's depression for the whole night instantly dissipated a lot. As soon as she sat down at her workstation, she saw another colleague from the secretariat, Shen Lanshan, coming over. "Sister Yang, President Leng asked you to go to his office." "I know." Wei Yang responded faintly. Shen Lanshan saw that she didn't move, so she came over and reminded her, "Sister Yang, Mr. Leng doesn't look very happy. He wants you to put down your work and go over right away." Wei Yan curled her lips. "I know, go ahead." Shen Lanshan has been working in the secretarial department for a year, and she is actually doing a pretty good job in her job, but she is a little deliberate in her flattery, and there is ambition in her eyes that can't be hidden. Wei Yan curled her lips, and lingered at her workstation for another half an hour before getting up and going to Leng Yeting's office. Combined with Leng Yeting's performance last night, she naturally understood that Leng Yeting would not do such a thing as sending her to Mr. Ding to sleep with him to discuss business, which would be a loss of face. However, it didn't prevent her from being angry at his pretending to be indifferent and not helping. Leng Yeting didn't sleep well the night before, and his face was very sour at the moment, and the 4 words, "Don't mess with me," were almost written on his face. Wei Yan brought a cup of coffee, and then stood far away, saying in a flat tone, "Boss Leng, what do you want?" Leng Yeting glanced at her. "Notify the Human Resources Department to recruit a chief secretary." Wei Yang looked at him in surprise. "Do you agree to let me go?" Leng Yeting's lips curled slightly, with a bit of sarcasm. "What? Do you think Leng can't do without you?" Wei Yang had heard too many of his unpleasant words, and now she only said, "Of course not, I'm just a small secretary. Without Boss Leng's cultivation, I'm nothing." Leng Yeting looked at her face, which could hardly suppress the joy, and sneered, "You are somewhat self-aware." Wei Yang smiled and said, "I'll arrange it now." Leng Yeting waved his hand. "Get lost." Wei Yang turned around and left his office quickly, and his steps were much lighter. Leng Yeting frowned at her back. "You are so happy to leave him?" Chapter 11. She is pregnant with someone else's child. Whether Leng Yeting is happy or not, she is very happy anyway. Wei Yang is so happy that she almost hums a song as she returns to her office. As soon as she sits down, she meets Shen Lanshan's eyes, which are filled with a bit of sourness that she can't suppress. After meeting her eyes, Shen Lanshan quickly adjusts her expression and smiles at her. "Sister Yang, what are you so happy about?" Wei Yang restrains her expression and says lightly, You should know that President Ling hates people below him to be too curious and ask about things they shouldn't ask about. Shenlanshan patted her mouth and said coquettishly, Sister Yang is teaching me that I'm too talkative. Wei Yan glanced at the other people in the secretariat, and they all straightened their backs and got busy. The chief secretary not only means a salary that has doubled, but also the qualification to follow Ling Yeting to various high-end occasions, and even to be Ling Yeting's bedmate. Even if it's only temporary. Everyone in the secretarial department was looking forward to Wei Yang's departure, but no one was as impatient as Shenlanshan, who was almost writing her ambition on her face. After drafting the requirements for the chief secretary recruitment, Wei Yan poked Ling Yeting and sent him the information. Boss Ling, do you have any special instructions for the chief secretary recruitment? Ling Yeting took the information and ignored her for a long time. It was almost lunchtime when he replied, you decide. If it doesn't work, you'll be responsible. Wei Yan. The damn capitalist, he was blackmailing her. Wei Yan cursed silently and notified the Human Resources Department of Ling Yeting's plan to recruit a chief secretary. Almost at the same time as the recruitment message was sent out, other people in the secretarial department received the message. The baby in her belly has been more than a month. Wei Yang has gradually started to have some pregnancy regurgitation during this period. She didn't pay attention to the can of plums she bought a few days ago, and ate almost a third of it in one morning. It wasn't until her teeth started to sour that she came to her senses. She calmly put away the plums and put them in the drawer, then got up and went to the bathroom. She rinsed her mouth and was about to take a tissue to wipe her mouth when she saw Shenlanshan come in and handed her a tissue in a flattering manner. Thank you. Wei Yan glanced at her and didn't take it. She took it and wiped her mouth. Shenlanshan pouted and said with a wronged look, Sister Yang, did I do something wrong to make you unhappy? Wei Yang narrowed his eyes and raised his eyebrows at her. Shenlanshan continued in a low voice, if I did something wrong, please tell me directly, I will definitely change. Wei Yang laughed, you don't even know what you did wrong, so you can guarantee that you can change. Shenlanshan smiled and said, Sister Yang is my senior. If you say I did something wrong, then it must be my fault. Wei Yang hooked his lips without comment and said nothing. Shenlanshan hesitated, Sister Yang, are you free after get off work? Let's go shopping and relax together. We haven't been shopping together for a long time. Wei Yang glanced at her, just say it if you have anything to say. Shenlanshan smiled a little embarrassedly and looked around. There were only two of them in the bathroom. She moved closer and lowered her voice, Sister Yang, I heard that President Ling is going to recruit a chief secretary. Is it true? Wei Yang did not deny the almost public matter and said lightly, yes. Shenlanshan moved closer and held Wei Yang's arm intimately, Sister Yang, I know that the chief secretary can be recommended by the previous chief internally. As long as you recommend me, whether it succeeds or not, these are all yours. She held a card between her fingers and tried to put it into Wei Yang's pocket. As soon as she got closer, the smell of perfume on her body became stronger. I didn't feel anything before, but now Wei Yang just felt a little out of control. Oh. Wei Yang suddenly shook off her hand, turned sideways, and said awkwardly. Shenlanshan's face turned black instantly. Wei Yang stuffed her bank card back casually and said, you don't have enough experience, don't even think about being the first secretary. Then, she quickly went into the bathroom cubicle. Shenlanshan outside the door was so angry that her face turned blue. She stomped her feet and walked out, gritting her teeth and silently said, why are you pretending? Didn't you also get promoted to the first secretary after 1 year of employment? I'm just not as good at climbing into bed as you. She didn't expect that after joining the company, she tried to please Wei Yang in every way, but Wei Yang didn't even consider helping her, and even refused to listen. She walked a few steps and heard the sound of Wei Yang retching in the bathroom. Her expression changed several times, and then she suddenly realized. Retching? Wei Yang suddenly wanted to resign. Could it be that she was pregnant? Chapter 12 Don't be pregnant, right? The footsteps outside the bathroom door came and went, and finally became lighter and stopped near her. Wei Yang frowned, trying her best to suppress the urge to vomit in her throat. Through the gap under the cubicle, she could glimpse the tip of the red high-heeled shoes worn by the person outside the door. She narrowed her eyes, and her eyebrows instantly became a little colder. After returning to the office, she saw the pair of red high-heeled shoes under Shenlanshan's feet at a glance, and her heart was slightly chilled. Sure enough, as soon as she sat down, she heard Shenlanshan coming over with a can of plums. Sister Yang, I see you like sour food. I have a can of plums here, do you want some? Wei Yan guessed Shenlanxin's thoughts almost instantly. This is because she was ready to take a risk and kill her because she was trying to please her openly. She was calm and smiled as she took it. Okay, I just have a bad appetite recently and I like sour food. Shenlanxin smiled and said, my sister also liked sour food when she was pregnant. They say sour boys and spicy girls. If I hadn't known that Sister Yang was single, I should have congratulated you on having a son. As she spoke, she raised her voice a little and said, by the way, Sister Yang, I heard you retching in the bathroom just now. Did you eat something bad? Is your stomach okay? She likes sour food and retches again. Shenlanxin almost said directly that she suspected she was pregnant. It was clearly time for lunch, but no one in the secretariat went to get food. They all pretended to be busy at their workstations, with their ears perked up. Wei Yang shook the plums in his hand, glanced at the people in the secretariat, and finally his eyes fell on Shenlanxin's face. Shenlanxin's face was full of concern and innocence, but her eyes were full of malice. The little girl was rough and cruel, and didn't give Wei Yang a chance to perfunctory. Seeing Shenlanxin's almost uncontrollable pride as if she had something on her, Wei Yang curled her lips and said, something's wrong, something big. Shenlanxin didn't expect her answer, her face changed, and her heart sank instantly. Wei Yang sighed. She took out a bottle of medicine from her office drawer, and saw the words, Weisul, clearly written on the bottle. Wei Yang opened it directly and took 2 pills with water, then said, everyone has heard that Ling's company is going to recruit a chief secretary to take over my job recently. I have had severe stomach pain recently, and I went to the hospital for a physical examination. I found that not only is my stomach disease a bit serious, but I also have some occupational diseases. I can't do my current job anymore, so I plan to resign and go home to recuperate. Everyone in the secretariat looked at her in surprise. After all, no one expected the reason to be so simple. But no one was embarrassed to play dumb anymore, and they all came to care about Wei Yang's health. Who doesn't have some occupational diseases? Others immediately felt a little sympathetic. Actually, the bottle said Weisula, but Wei Yang had already replaced the contents with vitamins. Wei Yang ignored Shenlanxin, who looked a little pale, and responded to a few other people, and prepared to go downstairs to eat. When she turned around, she saw Ling Yeting standing not far away, looking at her. Wei Yang's back instantly numbed, and she didn't know how much of what Ling Yeting had just said. Come here. He left 2 words and turned back to the office. Wei Yang followed him silently. On the desk was the lunch she had arranged for him early in the morning. As soon as he entered the office, Ling Yeting stopped and glanced back at her, his eyes finally stopping at her abdomen. The eyes were so scorching that Wei Yang almost had the illusion that he could see through her belly and see the secrets in her belly. She resisted the urge to avoid him, but he raised his eyebrows, his eyes still on her lower abdomen, and said casually, are you feeling uncomfortable? Chapter 13 Did you quarrel with Mr. Ling? A chill instantly climbed up my spine. The fingers hanging by his side clenched subconsciously. Ling Yeting obviously heard Shenlanxin's words, but she didn't know if he was deliberately testing her at this moment. She tried her best to stay calm and deliberately asked, Mr. Ling, are you afraid that I will get pregnant? Ling Yeting lowered his eyes, and his gaze accurately landed on the location of the uterus in her abdomen. He raised his hand and ran his fingers down her chest, finally landing on her lower abdomen. Wei Yang only felt that his finger was like a knife, going all the way down, with a coldness, making her lower abdomen tighten to the point of pain. Ling Yeting's reaction couldn't be considered happy at all. He retracted his hand and raised his eyes. Catching a glimpse of the sarcasm in the corners of her eyes and brows, he raised his lips and said in a calm tone, it's best not to. Wei Yang's face instantly turned ugly. The ridicule in her voice became even heavier, it's a pity that I don't live up to my expectations. Otherwise, with Mr. Ling's generous character, after the child is beaten, he might be able to give me 2 more apartments to satisfy me. Ling Yeting snorted coldly, then you take the house I gave you and marry another man. Wei Yang smiled more and more sarcastically, Mr. Ling, no matter how possessive you are, you still don't care whether your ex-lover will marry someone else in the future, right? She almost had the words, none of your business, written on her face. In the past, she always followed him, but now she started to get angry whenever they disagreed with him. Listening to this, Ling Yeting felt a little unspeakably dry and depressed. He looked at her coldly, Aren't you afraid that I will regret it and keep you by my side? Wei Yang's face was visibly nervous for a moment, and then she said, I believe Mr. Leng is not a person who breaks his word. He looked at her sternly and warily. His eyebrows suddenly became extremely cold, and the look he gave her was warning and ruthless. Remember, this is your choice. Leng Yeting walked to the desk, pulled out a few documents, explained a few words, and then waved. Wei Yang knew that Leng Yeting felt that she was ignorant and a little impatient. While she was thankful, she felt a little bitter in her heart. When did he give her a choice? He, Leng Yeting, felt that the two of them just had no physical relationship and could still be good subordinates. But she never thought about how she would feel if she stayed and saw him with another woman one day. She didn't slack off at work just because she was about to leave her job. She still carefully wrote down Leng Yeting's arrangements before turning around and leaving the office. It was lunchtime, and most people had already gone to the company canteen to eat. Wei Yang sat down at her workstation and flipped through their mailbox. The position of Ling's chief secretary is very valuable. Countless people are watching. As soon as the news is released, a large number of resumes come in. Wei Yang glanced at the resumes sent by the Human Resources Department, quickly screened them, and selected 3 to ask the Human Resources Department to arrange preliminary interviews, and then she would conduct a re-examination. After thinking for a moment, she took out her cell phone, picked a number and dialed it. After the other party connected, she said calmly, How long will you be ready to recuperate? Are you afraid that your position as chief secretary will have nothing to do with you when you come back? Although Sumai was not in the company, she naturally knew that Leng was recruiting a chief secretary. Although promotions within the company will be given priority for positions, Ling's practice in previous years has always been to recruit one internally and one externally, competing in both directions within a certain period of time, and finally selecting the best. Only Wei Yang's promotion was decided by Leng Yeting directly with one sentence. Upon hearing Wei Yang's words, Sumai immediately understood what she meant. However, she still knew the reasons for Leng Yeting's attitude towards her last time and the long vacation he specially gave her afterwards. It's hard to say whether Wei Yang can marry into the Leng family, but for Leng Yeting, that is definitely a special existence. Such a special existence really wants to resign. When Wei Yang said this, her first reaction was, Did you and Mr. Leng quarrel? Wei Yang was quiet for a few seconds and said calmly, We broke up. Chapter 14 being followed. Wei Yang's tone was so indifferent, Sumai laughed, and said meaningfully, No wonder Mr. Leng treats you differently. Wei Yang chuckled, with a bit of self-deprecation, as long as the ending is the same, what's the difference in the process? Sumai heard the meaning of her words and sighed, I will go back to the company tomorrow. Wei Yang didn't say much and hung up the phone. She was very efficient and returned to the company early the next morning. When Wei Yang arrived, she saw Sumai surrounded by several colleagues, saying with an exaggerated expression, I was passing through the tunnel when the car in front suddenly hit me. The car was too close and I had no time to apply the brakes. I hit it with my eyes closed. Before I could react, the car was hit by a car from behind. It was hit from the front and back. My feet were not good at that time. Sumai is the oldest among these people. Returning to the company at a time when the chief secretary is being recruited, others may have to think a little more. However, Sumai has the best hope after all, and the others don't want to ruin the relationship. She said it seriously, and the audience next to her also looked frightened and applauded her very much. Seeing Wei Yang coming, everyone greeted her, and Sumai winked at her. Wei Yang felt funny in her heart. As soon as she returned to her desk and sat down, she saw the CEO's exclusive elevator door open. Leng Yeting was followed by Song Ji, and the two walked out of the elevator together. Wei Yang and others quickly stood up straight and said hello. Song Ji's eyes fell on Sumai, who quickly stood up straight. Song Ji turned to look at Wei Yang, and followed Leng Yeting into the office without stopping. Leng Yeting was always like that, with a sullen face, and didn't even look at Wei Yang and the others. Sumai carefully moved to Wei Yang's side, lowered her voice and said, Why do I feel like I haven't seen you for a while? Mr. Leng is even colder. Wei Yang turned on the computer and said without raising her head, If you're not cold, can your surname be Leng? Sumai's expression was exaggerated, We haven't seen each other for just a few days, how dare you make cold jokes about Mr. Leng? Wei Yang smiled slightly, You want to try? Don't. Sumai thought of Leng Yeting's irritable and cold look before, and shrank her neck, I cherish my life. She quickly returned to her workstation, not daring to harass Wei Yang again. Wei Yang handled the work in an orderly manner. In the afternoon, he met two people who were taking the re-examination and felt that it was not appropriate. The people who came for the interview were all experienced, had good resumes, and looked good. It's a pity that the interest in lighten hidden in those eyes is too obvious. There is no shortage of such people in the secretarial department. Wei Yang had some predictions in her heart. To recruit the right person, sometimes it also depends on fate. Even if you can't become the first secretary, you must at least be pleasing to lighten, and it is best to be able to meet his needs. In this way, lighten could tell her to get out without any hesitation. As soon as lighten relaxed, she would leave overnight. After get off work on Friday, she drove directly to her home. The house has been sold, but she still has some luggage there. Before handing it over, she has to bring all the luggage at home to their hotel. As soon as the car drove not far from the company, Wei Yan felt something was wrong. In the rearview mirror, a black car followed her car almost as soon as it drove out of the company garage. Wei Yan did not go home, but drove aimlessly on the road, choosing the road with more people. I swayed several times but still couldn't get away. The car kept following me. Wei Yan narrowed her eyes and simply turned the steering wheel and headed towards the company, planning to hide there for the night. Just as she was about to turn the steering wheel, she saw the car behind her suddenly accelerate and hit the rear of her car at high speed. Chapter 15. Should he save or not? Wei Yang subconsciously stepped on the brakes and turned the steering wheel to avoid it. However, in the end, he couldn't escape and crashed directly into the curb. Her eyes widened suddenly, she felt dizzy, and her heart beat violently. She looked in the rearview mirror and saw that the other party's car was a Hummer, very hard. With such a collision, the front and rear of her mobility car were flattened, but the other party's car looked fine. The door of the other party's car opened, and two tall men got out, one from the left and the other from the right, and walked towards her direction. Wei Yang's expression changed drastically, and she tried to keep her composure and tried to start the car again. The other party noticed her intention and rushed to her car quickly. The car door was damaged and could not be locked. The other party used a strong force to pull the door open. The other party unbuckled her seat belt with one hand, clamped her arm with the other hand, and dragged her out as soon as she raised her hand. Wei Yang reached out to try to pry his hand away, and tried to exert force on his numb area. Another man stepped forward and slapped her in the face without any hesitation. Wei Yang felt her face was burning. She was already dizzy from being hit, and now she was even more dizzy from being hit. I just heard the man say, "You still want to play tricks?" Moving left and right, the two dragged her back into their Hummer. As soon as he was thrown into the car, he heard a somewhat familiar male voice, "Being beaten." She heard the voice and raised her head, only to see Mr. Ding looking at her, holding her chin roughly with one hand, looking at her red and swollen face, smiling fiercely. It seems that Secretary Wei is not good again. Mr. Ding is a man who always seeks retribution. Wei Yang had been cautious during this period, always guarding against his revenge, but unexpectedly she was still targeted. Her body was shaking uncontrollably. Knowing that it was useless to beg for mercy at this time, she gritted her teeth and said, "Mr. Ding, we just had a small misunderstanding before, why should we be so angry?" Mr. Ding gritted his teeth and said fiercely, "Misunderstanding? No woman dares to be so disrespectful to me, Ding Rong. You, a bitch who was played to death by lighten, dare to attack me. If I don't teach you a lesson, how can I swallow it? You have to take this breath." Wei Yang was very nervous, but she forced herself to calm down. She straightened her body and looked at him with a bit of cold arrogance in her eyes. "You also know that I am Lighten's woman. If you dare to scheme against me like this, you can really afford it. The price for offending Mr. Lin." Ding Rong squinted his eyes, looked at Wei Yang's calm demeanor, and said coldly, "Are you bluffing me? Who doesn't know that the Ling family is recruiting a chief secretary? You, a little girl who is about to step down, still dare to hold onto your identity as a representative. Ling." Wei Yang smiled. "The Ling family is recruiting a chief secretary, but Mr. Ding must not know that the interviewer is me." Ding Rong came closer and looked at Wei Yang. As expected of Lighten's secretary, his courage is different. However, no matter how eloquent you are, it can't change your fate today. Ding Rong winked at the two people next to him. "Drive, go to the hotel." As soon as he finished speaking, the two men immediately held Wei Yang down. The car was about to start, and Wei Yang couldn't help but feel anxious, so she quickly said, Mr. Ding, do you really want to ruin your cooperation with Ling because of your anger? You just don't believe what I say, otherwise you ask me to call Ling Yeting and I ask him to pick me up. After all, Ding the Ling family and the Ling family cooperated, and you didn't touch me. Even if something like this happened today, Ling Yeting wouldn't do anything to you. If you touch me, I can guarantee that Ling Yeting will never let you go. Ding Rong looked at Wei Yan's confident look, and couldn't help but show a trace of hesitation on his expression. Wei Yan quickly struck while the iron was hot, just make a phone call. You don't want to make a big mistake. Ding Rong then said with a gloomy expression, okay, I'll give him my cell phone and call him. But if Ling Yeting doesn't like you anymore, be prepared to serve me well. After he finished speaking, someone went to get her handbag and handed her the phone. Wei Yan kept praying in her heart and dialed the phone. In the past, when Ling Yeting was in a good mood, he would take her out personally. But now that she has broken up with her, she is not sure whether Ling Yeting will still be willing to meddle in her business. However, thinking about the last time she ran out of Ding Rong's room, Ling Yeting took her away and rescued her, and I think he probably wouldn't refuse to save her. Their beeps came one after another, as if a big hand was clasping on Wei Yang's heartstrings, causing her breathing to become a little disordered. Ding Rong looked at her nervous expression and chuckled, but his eyes couldn't help but fall on the phone. After beeping 3 times in succession, the call was finally connected. Chapter 16 Ling Yeting, save me. Wei Yang hurriedly shouted, Ling Yeting. Ling Yeting, save me. However, the person on the other end of the phone did not speak, and a mechanical female voice responded to Wei Yang, the number you dialed is in use, please. Ling Yeting actually hung up her phone. Their heart seemed to be tightened by an invisible big hand, kneading it hard, the pain was unspeakable. Wei Yang pinched the phone and hurriedly said, I'll call another one. However, before the phone could be dialed out, Ding Rong had already snatched the phone and threw it out of the window. The phone was directly broken, along with the last hope in Wei Yan's heart. Ding Rong pinched her jaw, his eyes full of viciousness and lust. Don't struggle, who is Ling Yeting? He is the most shrewd businessman in our Anshan. You are a woman who is tired of playing, will he be willing to stand up for you? With a look from Ding Rong, the car started. Wei Yang's expression changed. She quickly raised her hand and held Ding's hand, tensing up her nerves and saying, Boss Ding, you are also a businessman, don't you want benefits? Instead of playing with me to vent your anger, why don't we discuss cooperation? Ding Rong smiled and said, what tricks have you come up with? Wei Yang's face was full of resentment towards Ling Yeting. Ling Yeting is ruthless to me, so don't blame me for being ungrateful to him. I have been following him closely for these years, and I have mastered a lot of Ling's secrets. Don't you want the contract outside Lin City? Boss Ding, as long as you let me go and we cooperate, I can help you get these things. Ding Rong didn't say anything, squinting his eyes and looking at her. Wei Yang's heart was beating, and she clenched her palms nervously. Of course, she couldn't really betray Ling Yeting. Even if Ding Rong let her go, Ling Yeting would have thousands of ways to kill her. Ling Yeting is much more cruel than Boss Ding. As long as she could trick Ding Rong into letting her go temporarily, she would immediately hide abroad. The money in her hand is enough for her to stay abroad for a long time. Given Ding Rong's status, even if he wanted to take revenge on her, he would not keep thinking about teaching her a lesson for years. Seeing Ding Rong's expression slightly relaxed, the next second, he saw him laughing contentiously. Secretary Wei is really naive. Wei Yan's heart sank instantly. Ding Rong laughed coldly, I let you go, what if you run away? I prefer to take the initiative rather than handing the right of choice to others. When you become my woman, you have to help me obediently. Wei Yang sat down dejectedly, looking at the ugly face of the man in front of her, and the whole person wanted to vomit. Because of excessive grief, there was even a faint pain in her lower abdomen. She hugged her lower abdomen painfully and helplessly, with only tears on her face. The car drove all their way to their hotel parking lot. Ding Rong got out of the car first, and the other 2 men grabbed Wei Yang and dragged her down. She struggled desperately, but all she got in return was a hot slap from Ding Rong. Ding Rong grabbed her hair and smiled viciously beside her ear, Secretary Wei, I advise you to be obedient. If you make me feel comfortable, you will suffer less. Wei Yang looked at him coldly, and her eyes wanted to skin him alive. Ding Rong saw her eyes, but he seemed even more excited. The hotter the woman, the more exciting it is to play with. She looked for a chance to escape, but those men were obviously not doing this for the first time and watched her very closely. They went straight into the elevator, and what was even more unfortunate was that they didn't even meet a passerby who happened to be staying in the hotel along the way. Until she was dragged into their hotel room and looked at the camera that had been set up in their hotel room, Wei Yan understood what Ding Rong meant just now. She was thrown directly onto the bed with horror all over her body. Ding Rong stood beside the bed, taking off his clothes and smiling. "Secretary Wei, don't worry, my brothers will take beautiful and clear photos of you, we can enjoy them together in the future, and I promise you will be good." No. No. If Ding Rong really took photos of this kind of thing, her life would be completely ruined. Wei Yan broke down and cried, struggling to retreat. "Get out! Get out!" Chapter 17. Is it going to end like this? The two men brought by Ding Rong did not mean to leave, but teased beside them. "Boss Ding, brothers will definitely take photos of your masculinity for you, enjoy it from all angles." Ding Rong smiled cruelly and said to the two men, "Tie him up first, this bitch has some skills, I can't suffer from her again." The two men stepped forward and quickly held Wei Yan down, and then tied her to the bed in a big letter shape. Hands and feet were tied, she struggled desperately but could not move. Facing such people, even the words of pleading were saved. She knew that the more she begged, the happier Ding Rong and the others would laugh. The men looked at her as if they were looking at a commodity, full of bad taste. Tears had already blurred her vision. Ding Rong had stripped naked and rushed towards her, his fingers randomly touching her body. Wei Yan slowly closed her eyes and lay quietly. For a moment, she felt that even her soul had left her body. As long as she didn't open her eyes, she wouldn't see such an ugly scene. As long as she didn't look, it was as if the person being forced was not herself. She seemed to be floating, watching this extremely ugly drama with an indifferent and bystander attitude. There was only one simple thought in her mind. If she was really defiled, maybe she should disappear from this world with her child. It's just a pity that her child has to leave with her before he is born. The man's foul breath when he approached stimulated her nerves. A trace of hatred flashed across Wei Yan's face, and she opened her mouth the next second. "R." Ding Rong's ear was bitten in her mouth, and the whole person screamed miserably. "Let go! Let me go!" Wei Yan bit it tightly, and soon tasted blood in her mouth. However, she had only one thought in her mind: bite him to death. Ding Rong bent her body and screamed in pain. The other two men also rushed over, kicking her legs and waist to force her to let go. Ding Rong used great strength to hit her head hard, and roared angrily, "Bitch, let go!" "Oh!" Wei Yang only felt a great pain in her head was buzzing, and her consciousness was a little unclear. Ding Rong was in great pain, and punched her face and eyes a few times to vent his anger. The eye sockets soon swelled up, and at this moment, the pain was so severe that she couldn't open her eyes at all. She simply closed her eyes, and in the darkness and dizziness, she numbly waited for the next round of more brutal revenge and beating. Ding Rong covered his ears and yelled like crazy, "You have good teeth. Wait for me. I will knock your teeth out one by one." She seemed to hear the sound of violent kicking on the door. Someone called her name, followed by the tragic shouts of Ding Rong and others. Ding Rong was kicked to the ground by someone, and looked at the angry person in horror, and said in disbelief, "Boss Leng." Wei Yan thought confusedly, maybe it was hallucination. The person she most hoped to save her hung up her phone directly after hearing her cry for help. "Baby, it was Dad who gave up on us." "Wei Yang! Wei Yang! Wake up!" Someone held her cheek, and the familiar voice passed through the dizziness of her brain and entered her ears. Someone kept calling her name. Wei Yang slowly opened her eyes, and through her tears, she saw the man who had hung up on her before, now looking at her from above, calling her name. His brows were furrowed, and there was a rare glimpse of anxiety and worry in his eyes. Wei Yan looked at him quietly. Leng Yeting. Chapter 18. He's really here. She didn't say anything, but opened her eyes with some fear, and was held tightly in his arms. The man's hands trembled slightly, and Wei Yang didn't know if it was because of his worry about her. She didn't even move, didn't struggle, and felt vaguely that she was still fantasizing. Until Leng Yeting wrapped his coat around her, then picked her up and left the room. Wei Yang looked back and looked inside from the door, only to see Ding Rong and several others lying on the ground, with blood on their bodies and faces full of pain. She sniffed the familiar cold fragrance on Leng Yeting's body, and then she gradually came back to her senses. Leng Yeting. Leng Yeting held her hand tightly. "I'm here. It's really him. He really came." The grievance that she had been holding back rushed straight to her heart in an instant. She couldn't control her tears for a long time. She grabbed the corner of his clothes tightly and cried silently, "Ling Yeting, you bastard." Ling Yeting didn't refute, but just hugged her tightly and whispered, "I'll take you to the hospital to treat your wounds." Kicked and beaten by Ding Rong and others, her cheeks were already swollen, and her eyes were swollen so that she could barely see people. But, when she thought of the hospital, Wei Yan hurriedly said, "No. No. I don't want to go." Once she went to the hospital, could she still hide the matter of her child? Then what was waiting for her next was Ling Yeting forcing her to beat the child. She struggled like crazy, and Ling Yeting could hardly control himself and quickly put her down. As soon as she landed, Wei Yan wanted to run. "I don't want to go. Don't want to go." Ling Yeting was quick and grabbed her, then held her tightly in his arms. "You are seriously injured, be obedient." Wei Yan was decisive and bit Ling Yeting's hand without hesitation. "No." Ling Yeting frowned slightly, the back of his hand hurt so much, he could feel the woman's determination to break free. She was tense and trembling, obviously afraid and resisting to the extreme. He let her bite, holding her hand harder and harder. "Calm down first, calm down. If you don't want to go, don't go." Wei Yan paused and looked up at him. "Really?" Her expression was miserable, she looked pitiful and helpless to the extreme. As if he was the one bullying her. Looking at her like this, Ling Yeting's voice softened unconsciously. Ling Yeting nodded, raised his hand and touched her head to comfort her. "I'll ask the doctor to come and see you, go and rest first." Wei Yan breathed a sigh of relief. The next second, she felt her legs go weak and fell into his arms. She was able to stand firmly by leaning on his chest. Ling Yeting picked her up and took her into another room. Ling Yeting put her on the sofa. Wei Yang was wrapped in his coat, curled up, and her body was still shaking slightly uncontrollably, but now she was tense and her face was expressionless. Songji sent the medicine box over and left. Ling Yeting took it, looked at her pitiful appearance, frowned and didn't say anything, found the ointment, and applied it to her personally. Wei Yang's tense nerves could not bear it, and tears fell silently. She rarely cried in front of him. In the past, even if he bullied her to the extreme in bed, even if her voice was hoarse, she just looked at him stubbornly with red eyes. At that time, Ling Yeting thought that he should really use more force, bully her until she cried and begged for mercy. But now that he really saw her crying, Ling Yeting felt very irritated again. He couldn't help but apply more force to apply the medicine. Wei Yang hissed in pain and looked up at him. Ling Yeting said expressionlessly, "Don't cry." If it weren't for his indulgence, how could Ding Rong dare to bully her like this? Without the incident in the hotel, there would be no revenge. If he had answered her call for help, she wouldn't have suffered so much, and Ding Rong would have let her go long ago. So now, although he arrived in time, Wei Yang was getting angrier and angrier. She ignored him and cried even harder. Ling Yeting became more and more irritated, and his tone became heavier. He said sternly, "Don't cry." She frowned and glared at him, and her tone was not very good. "What do you care?" The veins on Ling Yeting's forehead jumped, and he lowered his head to look at the miserable appearance of the woman in his arms. He stopped and his eyes suddenly became deep. Wei Yang's heart jumped subconsciously. When she reacted, Ling Yeting had already grabbed her collar. With a little force, she moved closer to his arms. His lips with a bit of coolness pressed against hers, and he held her lips almost fiercely. Chapter 19, she is a professional at making him angry. He threw away the medical cotton swab in his other hand, grabbed her waist, and hugged her whole body into his arms. Wei Yang was forced to look up, and felt his dominance, and the grievance in her heart became more turbulent. Ling Yeting tasted the salty taste of tears and blood on her lips, and then he realized that she was crying even harder. Ling Yeting subconsciously let her go and raised his hand to wipe her tears. But Wei Yang slapped him away, looking extremely aggrieved, and shouted, "You bully me too. What's the difference between you and Ding Rong? Ling Yeting. Has he fallen to the point of comparing himself with Ding Rong?" Looking at the woman's face of not knowing what's good for him, Ling Yeting was provoked by her. He looked at her expressionlessly. "If I really want to force you, no one can save you." Wei Yang's whole body was numb. "Is this the reason why you watched someone die without saving him?" He looked a little puzzled. "When did I watch someone die without saving him?" Wei Yang's expression turned cold. Indeed, he did not watch someone die without saving him. He just waited until she was almost taught a lesson before coming to let her know that she couldn't afford to offend him. Wei Yang stared at him intently, and then suddenly stood up. Thank you, Mr. Leng, for your timely rescue today. I will leave first. Don't worry, I will find a suitable person to take over my job as soon as possible, and I won't let you worry too much about a small person like me. She walked out while talking. This was said in a tough way, but not so tough, because her clothes were torn, and she could only wrap herself in his coat at this moment, which seemed inferior. Leng Yeting looked at her coldly, with a mocking tone. Secretary Wei is really good at this trick of crossing the river and destroying the bridge. Wei Yan paused, clenched her palms, and suddenly turned back to look at Leng Yeting. Boss Leng, today, I sincerely thank you for saving me. But if there is nothing else, I hope you can just tell me to get out, or you can give me some more money to let me get out. In short, don't bother her. Leng Yeting looked at the ungrateful woman in front of him and wanted to strangle her to death. Wei Yang really grew up. How obedient she used to be, how annoying she is now. She didn't even need him to do anything. At this moment, she was already being beaten to death. But her temper was as hard as a stone in the pit, which made him really understand the multifaceted nature of women. Leng Yeting was so angry that he was furious. She was still asking without any expression, Boss Leng, what else do you want to do? Leng Yeting looked at her and said only one word, get lost. Wei Yan rolled her eyes without hesitation and really left. She just wanted to leave this city right away and didn't want to get involved in these things at all. The scent of the woman in the air faded. Leng Yeting stood there for a long time and finally kicked the sofa. Songji was about to find Leng Yeting, but saw Leng Yeting walking out with a face full of anger. Wei Yan's figure had disappeared. Looking at Leng Yeting's face, Songji was startled. He didn't dare to ask where Wei Yan was going. He just said, Boss Leng, how to deal with Ding Rong. Leng Yeting was full of anger and went straight to the room where Ding Rong was. Ding Rong and the two bodyguards he brought were beaten bloody. The wife he found in his early years had some power in her family and started her career by being involved in gangs. She has been doing well in Anqing these years. It was because everything went smoothly that he became a little proud. Leng Yeting entered the house, sat down on the sofa, looked down at the people on the ground, and said in a playful tone, playing with women, playing with me, Leng Yeting. Ding Rong complained in his heart, Boss Leng, Boss Leng. This is all misunderstanding, really all misunderstanding. I believed the rumors and thought that you and Secretary Wei had broken up, otherwise I would not dare to touch your woman even if I had 100 guts. Songji kicked him immediately. This Ding Rong is really stupid. Even if it is a woman that Leng Yeting is tired of playing with, he has no right to think about it, let alone saying it in front of Leng Yeting. Leng Yeting narrowed his eyes, took out a cigarette from his arms, and took 2 puffs. In the smoke, he seemed to see Wei Yang's pitiful and angry look in front of him. The inner irritability became more and more serious. He flicked his 2 fingers lightly, and the remaining half of the cigarette in his hand flew out directly and fell on Ding Rong. Ding Rong was burned, shivering but not daring to make a sound, staring at Leng Yeting, as if waiting for the emperor's verdict. Leng Yeting stood up and left, his voice dull and ruthless. Doesn't he like to knock people's teeth out one by one? Let him experience it first. Chapter 20 Bleeding. Wei Yang left the hotel and was blown by the cold wind outside. She shivered and wrapped Leng Yeting's coat tighter. There was still his cold fragrance on the clothes, familiar and cruel. She had also deliberately angered Yeting and then found a reason to leave. Just now, she felt a faint pain in her lower abdomen. Wei Yang was panicked, stood on the side of the road and hailed a taxi, and went to the hospital. Her mobile phone was broken, and the driver followed her upstairs to find Yao Yao to get the fare before leaving. Yao Yao had just finished the operation and was about to go home to rest. When he saw her, he was shocked and asked repeatedly, what happened? Who did it? Could it be Leng Yeting? Wei Yang held her hand tightly, shook his head, and said softly, Yao Yao, my stomach hurts. Yao Yao immediately didn't care about asking other questions, and quickly wrote a list for Wei Yang to go for an examination. During the examination, Wei Yang found some bleeding symptoms, and his heart became more uneasy. When the test results were obtained, Yao Yao's face was not very good, and Wei Yang's face could be said to be bloodless. He quickly took the test sheet and looked at the data on it in detail. Yao Yao comforted her, don't be so nervous, it's normal to have some bleeding symptoms in the early pregnancy. Your progesterone is low, take some progesterone capsules to stabilize it, and you should rest well at home during this period. Wei Yang held her lower abdomen a little anxiously. Knowing theoretical knowledge is one thing, but it's another feeling when it really happens to her. It's not easy for her to have this child, and probably only she knows it. After she got the medicine, she went back home to get her luggage and carried the suitcase back to a hotel near the company. As the chief secretary, she had to ask Ling Yeting for leave and wait for his approval. Wei Yang hesitated a little, but still called him. Ling Yeting's awkwardness was still there, and his voice was very cold. Go ahead. Wei Yang pursed her lips. After all, she needed help, so her voice was a little lower. Boss Ling, I'm not feeling well, I want to take a week off. In order to protect the fetus, Yao Yao suggested that she should stay in bed this week, and then go to the hospital for a checkup. If the indicators are improved, she can consider going back to work. Ling Yeting was silent for a few seconds before saying, approved. Wei Yang breathed a sigh of relief, thank you. Ling Yeting hung up the phone directly, and his fingers operated on the keyboard a few times casually, and Wei Yang's face instantly appeared on the computer interface. Ding Rong wanted to take a video of him and Wei Yang to threaten her, and recorded the whole process of him and his two men beating Wei Yang. Ling Yeting looked at the woman in the camera with despair in her eyes. He had no way to dispel the anger in his heart. He threw the monitor to the ground with his backhand. Songji was working next to him. He heard the noise and rushed over. Looking at the mess on the ground, he was a little shocked and said, Boss Ling, what happened? Ling Yeting pulled his tie, his collar slightly open, and his body was full of blood and violence. How is Ding's handling? Songji hurriedly said, Ding Rong has been imprisoned. The evidence we provided is enough for him to spend the rest of his life in prison. Ding's accounts are also being investigated. It is expected that the acquisition can be completed in 3 working days. Ling Yeting leaned back in his chair, raised his eyes slightly, and gave Songji invisible pressure. Find a few people to keep an eye on him, don't let him have it so easy. Songji looked stern and nodded, yes. Ling Yeting waved at Songji. Songji turned around and walked a few steps outside, and couldn't help looking back at Ling Yeting. Maybe even Ling Yeting himself didn't know that he actually cared about Wei Yan. Whether it was out of love or habit. Songji couldn't help but say, Boss Ling, if you regret it, you can have a good talk with Secretary Wei. She has a good temper and should be easy to coax. Good temper? Ling Yeting sneered. He once thought so, but Wei Yan slapped him. Songji's words made him feel a sense of crisis. After a few seconds of silence, he said, I never regret it. Chapter 21 Company Rumors. Wei Yang stayed in bed in the hotel for a whole week, and even asked someone to deliver meals to her room. In fact, she really shouldn't have been obsessed with this child. A lifetime is still long. Who can guarantee whether she will meet the right person in the future? Why tie herself to Ling Yeting? However, Wei Yang didn't expect that she would never be able to get up after falling into Ling Yeting's pit. She insisted on being stubborn and willing to bear the consequences. After making sure that there was nothing wrong with her body, Wei Yang returned to the company after her leave. Several people in the office were chatting in the tea room with their backs to her, and did not notice her arrival. Sumai said faintly, boring. Shenlanshan replied, I'm telling you what I'm telling you. Believe it or not, I'm not forcing you to listen. Sumai rolled her eyes, turned around with her coffee and was about to leave, but she saw Wei Yang standing aside, looking at them with a faint expression. Sumai paused, a mischievous smile appeared on her face, she flirted with Wei Yang, turned around and said to Shenlanshan. Shenlanshan, you have to have evidence when you speak. Special Assistant Song said Secretary Wei was on a business trip, but how come you said Secretary Wei can't come back? If you know some big gossip, you can tell it if you have the ability. What's the point of hiding it? Shenlanshan's face flashed with a bit of pride, I know, but I won't tell you. Anyway. Sumai contacted Wei Yang during the days she was on leave and told her that Shenlanshan was making up stories about her behind her back. She also knew that Songji covered up for her and deliberately said to the outside world that she was on a business trip. Wei Yang didn't have time to think about Shenlanshan at that time, but now she felt a little strange. Why was Shenlanshan so sure that she couldn't come back? Before Shenlanshan finished speaking, someone saw Wei Yang and hurriedly shouted in panic, Secretary Wei. Good morning. Good morning. Being caught talking behind someone's back, several people looked very embarrassed. Shenlanshan's back was even stiffer. She turned her head to look at Wei Yang, as if she couldn't believe her appearance, but she quickly adjusted her expression and said awkwardly, "Secretary Wei, good morning." Wei Yang looked at her with a smile and ignored her. How could Shenlanshan not understand that Sumai had deliberately said that to trick her? She turned her head and glared at Sumai fiercely. Sumai had a smile on her face and moved closer to Wei Yan while drinking coffee. If you don't come back, some people will almost lose their weight. The fox's tail will be raised to the sky, afraid that others don't know what she is thinking. Shenlanshan looked embarrassed and quickly returned to her workstation. Wei Yang didn't pay much attention and sat down at his workstation, but found that Shenlanshan was peeking at him, and her face seemed to be a little puzzled. Wei Yang looked at her like that, and suddenly had some guesses in his mind. Leng Yeting walked into the company and walked towards the office with his footsteps as fast as the wind. He saw someone at Wei Yang's position, paused, glanced at her, and walked into the office as usual. Shenlanshan's eyes lit up when she saw Leng Yeting, and she immediately held the documents and said, "Boss Leng, I have some work to report to you." Wei Yang looked at her following behind Leng Yeting, and the corners of his lips curled up very slowly, with a bit of sneer. Shenlanshan followed Leng Yeting almost all the way. Wei Yan watched them enter the office, and after a while, she sorted out the documents and prepared to give them to Leng Yeting for signature. She raised her hand and knocked on the door. Leng Yeting's voice in the room was cold, "Come in." Wei Yang opened the door and went in, and saw Shenlanshan leaning over and talking to Leng Yeting. Her angle was exquisite, and he could easily see the scenery of her chest with just a glance. Chapter 22 Are You So Afraid of Me? Wei Yang felt very funny in her heart when she saw Shenlanshan twisting into a snake and wanting to strip naked and sit on Leng Yeting's lap. Based on her understanding of Leng Yeting, Shenlanshan was afraid that she had used too much force. Leng Yeting finished signing with an expressionless face, and his voice was a little colder, "Get out." Shenlanshan then slowly stood up straight with a look of reluctance on her face. She held the document in her arms, and she still looked shy and reluctant when facing Leng Yeting. "Mr. Leng, I'll go out first." Leng Yeting didn't react at all. Shenlanshan bit her lip, turned around and walked out. She glanced at Wei Yang unhappily, as if she thought she was in the way. After Shenlanshan left, Wei Yang walked to Leng Yeting's desk. "Mr. Leng, do you think I need to take another week's leave? If I came back a week later, there would be no need to recruit people. I might just settle on Shenlanshan." Her tone was calm, but Leng Yeting could smell something sinister. Leng Yeting looked at her with raised eyebrows. After a week of training, the injuries on the woman's face have healed, and she is as smooth and clean as before, no longer looking like the disgusting look she had when we last met. She has a beautiful appearance, even if she wears very light makeup, she looks a little more glamorous than others. Leng Yeting raised his chin slightly. "Come here." An ordinary movement, but he did it with a hint of arrogance. Wei Yang stood 2 steps closer, but looked at him warily. "What does Mr. Leng want to say?" Leng Yeting said nothing, only stared at her, his eyes vaguely threatening. Wei Yang had no choice but to get closer. Leng Yeting suddenly stretched out his hand and exerted a slight force. Her feet were unsteady and she was pulled over and threw herself into his arms. Leng Yeting sniffed it quietly for a few minutes. Unlike Shenlanshan, the strong smell of perfume on her body made him extremely bored. The feminine fragrance on Wei Yang's neck was subtle but easily stirred up his nerves. Wei Yang struggled, holding her hands on his chest, her face full of annoyance. "Leng Yeting." Leng Yeting leaned back on the chair, easily clasping her slender waist with one hand. Although he looked up at her, there was a bit of evil in his look, and his tone was lazy, looking for trouble. Wei Yang has been with him for so many years. If nothing else, he knows enough about this aspect. Leng Yeting's expression was obviously a little emotional. She didn't know where she had irritated him, so she just straightened her body and said, "How dare I?" However, if Mr. Leng really likes Shenlanshan, he can just tell me about it, and it will save the colleagues in the personnel department a lot of work. Leng Yeting sneered. "What else do you dare to do? Not only do you dare to treat me as a man who can only think with his lower body, but you also dare to insult my aesthetics." Shenlanshan looks okay, but after all, she is a bit angry. There are too many women who want to crawl into Leng Yeting's bed. From rich ladies to film and television queens, Shenlanshan really can't be ranked among them. In fact, Wei Yang didn't know why he fell in love with her back then and even took the initiative to find her. It was precisely because of the differences that occasionally leaked out in the details when Leng Yeting was first with her that she naively mistakenly thought that she was different to him. Until he personally broke her fantasy. Wei Yang looked at him deeply and then said, If you don't like it, you don't like it. Let me go. I have to go out to work. Leng Yeting's fingertips slid across her waist, and Wei Yang's whole body tensed up, looking at him as if to guard against thieves. Leng Yeting raised his eyes slightly. Are you so afraid of me? Wei Yan was held in his hand, so she didn't dare to say anything. She bared her teeth and said, this isn't fear, it's respect. There was a smile in Leng Yeting's eyes. As soon as she pulled away her hand, she quickly stood up and straightened her clothes. He raised his eyebrows, but without saying anything else, he looked at the document she brought over, signed his name, and said calmly, accompany me to go to Fansong at 9 o'clock. Wei Yan was stunned for a few seconds before nodding. Fan Cage was opened by Leng Yeting's good brother Fu Moshing for his lover Ji Liang. It is highly private, membership-based, and the annual membership fee alone costs millions. It is a place that Leng Yeting and his friends often go to. Wei Yang has been with Leng Yeting for so many years, and she has a good relationship with Ji Liang. Just say goodbye before you leave. Wei Yan watched Leng Yeting lower his head and prepare to continue reading the documents. She wanted to be angry with him, and deliberately imitated Shen Lanxin's behavior just now, holding her voice and saying, Mr. Leng, I'm going out first. Leng Yeting's knuckles holding the pen tightened slightly, and when he raised his eyes, he saw Wei Yang imitating Shen Lanxin, twisting her waist and walking out. Although it is just a back view, it is full of provocation. At this moment, he just wanted to teach this woman who deliberately angered her a lesson, and watch her beg for mercy under him. Chapter 23. She can't give him what he wants. Leng Yeting and the others have a special VIP private room in Fanlong, which is 4 to 5 times the size of an ordinary room and has a full range of drinks and entertainment. Even people who don't like to play can still find fun in it. Wei Yang followed Leng Yeting to Fan Song on time and saw Ji Liang and Fu Moshing already there. Ji Liang was dressed hot and sexy, and was being kissed by Fu Moshing on the sofa. This was not the first time Wei Yang had encountered this. She still couldn't help but feel her face flush and her ears were hot. She secretly looked at Leng Yeting from the corner of her eye. Leng Yeting, who was already covered in evil fire, noticed her gaze and raised his eyes to look at her. His eyes were extremely penetrating, like a knife that was so cold that it had the illusion of being hot, cutting her clothes bit by bit. In his eyes, she suddenly became indifferent. The corners of Leng Yeting's lips curled up and he leaned over. He was already a bit taller than her, so leaning forward slightly made him feel even more oppressive. Leng Yeting's voice was slightly hoarse, Secretary Wei wants it too. Leng Yeting's eyebrows were naturally pretty, and when he came so close, Wei Yan swallowed subconsciously. She hurriedly took a step back, raised her hand and knocked on the door in panic. Fu Moshing turned to look at the door and muttered, "You guys came at the right time." There was another person in the corner, dressed in black, with an air of unruliness all over him. He was playing pool. It was Zhan Beiming, another good brother of Leng Yeting. Hearing the noise, Zhan Beiming turned back and looked in their direction, and Leng Yeting walked straight towards him. Currently, among the 4 major families in Anshan, Leng Yeting and Fu Moshing each account for 1, and the other 2 are the Mu family and the Chu family. However, in recent years, the Chu family has gradually declined, while the Zhan family has developed rapidly and has already occupied a place among the 4 new major families. Ji Liang pushed Fu Moshing away. "Okay, get away." Ji Liang followed Fu Moshing when she was 18 years old. When she was pregnant with the child, Fu Moshing forced her to beat her. The child was gone, and she wanted to pull away, but Fu Moshing wouldn't let her. No title will be given, and no one will be released. Later, in order to compensate her, Fu Moshing opened this private club for her to ensure that she would have no worries about food and clothing in the next life. When she was young, she named the club Fan Song, which meant that it was a cage that restricted her freedom, in order to mock Fu Moshing. Fu Moshing was not angry even after being pushed away. He squeezed her waist, stood up and walked towards Leng Yeting. "How about a round?" Leng Yeting walked towards the billiard table with him in tacit agreement. Ji Liang greeted Wei Yang with a smile. "Yang Yang, come here." Wei Yang smiled and sat down next to her. Ji Liang reached out and held her face, looked at her carefully for a while, and then said, "She is recovering well." Wei Yang was stunned and looked at her in surprise. "How do you know?" Leng Yeting is not a person who likes to talk too much, so he probably won't tell them about Ding Rong specifically. Ji Liang looked at the confusion on her face and smiled. "Leng Yeting didn't tell you?" "Zhan Beiming happened to see you being bullied by Ding Rong and called him, otherwise he wouldn't have arrived in time." Wei Yang felt something was wrong and unconsciously pinched her fingers. Did Ling Yeting come over after receiving a call from Zhang Beiming? What about that phone call she made? She thought Ling Yeting hung up the phone on her purposely to embarrass her, and then went to save her. Only then did she realize she seemed to have misunderstood him. Ji Liang leaned lazily on the sofa, and his every move was full of charm. He picked up the wine glass and took a sip of wine, and asked directly, "What's going on between you and Ling Yeting?" Although Ling Yeting didn't care about Wei Yang, Zhang Beiming said that he was very anxious when he received the call and rushed over immediately. Moreover, the news of Ding's acquisition by Ling's company had already spread. But if there were no problems between the two, how could a person like Ding Rong dare to miss Ling Yeting's woman? She asked directly, and Wei Yang did not hide her plan. "Sister Liang, I am here to say goodbye to you today. I have already submitted my resignation, and I will leave Anqing when I find someone to take over the job. If we have the opportunity to see you again in the future, probably less. It's nice to say the least." After leaving Anqing, she should never have the chance to interact with people in this circle. Ji Liang paused while drinking, and then said, "Is he willing to let you go?" Wei Yan calmly acted as if she was not the one who was abandoned. "Mr. Ling mentioned it first." Ji Liang looked back at Ling Yeting and suddenly said, "I'm afraid it won't be so easy to get together and break up." The two chatted for a few more words before Wei Yang stood up and came to Ling Yeting's side. However, her eyes did not look at him, but she said to Zhang Beiming, "Young Master Zhang, Ding Rong's matter is all thanks to you. If there is anything you need me for in the future, just ask me." Zhang Beiming glanced at Ling Yeting next to him, and said with a half-smile, "I just made a phone call to report the message. I have to thank some people for running fast enough." Wei Yang straightened her body and said to Zhang Beiming and Ling Yeting together, "Yes, thank you, Master Zhang, and thank you, Mr. Ling. I will never forget your kindness." Ling Yeting suddenly said, "This is an unforgettable kindness, and you just say thank you lightly like this." Wei Yang was stunned for a few seconds by his sudden attack, and then looked at him quietly. "How do you want me to repay you, Mr. Ling?" Ling Yeting said slowly, "I will tell you when I think about it." "Then think about it slowly." Wei Yang was too lazy to pay attention to his madness, turned around and left. Fu Motion was holding back a laugh next to him. "Your little secretary, is this a genetic mutation?" The cat turned into a tiger. Ling Yeting ignored him, bent down and made a hole in one, and then looked at him. "Are you very free? If you have bagua skills, let's practice your skills first." Wei Yang turned around and left, going straight to the bathroom. Ling Yeting's cell phone was put aside just now, and she took it over casually. Having been together day and night for so many years, his mobile phone password is no longer a secret to her. She did not pry into the contents of his mobile phone, but went directly to the call records. Turning to the day she was kidnapped by Ding Rong, she read them one by one and found there was no record of that call in Ling Yeting's cell phone. On the contrary, about 10 minutes later, there was indeed a call from Zhang Beiming. It was absolutely impossible for Ling Yeting to have the leisure to delete that record and then go rescue her after answering Zhang Beiming's call. Then, there is only one possibility. Someone answered her call, denied her the chance to ask for help, and then deleted the record and destroyed the evidence. Who could this person be? Chapter 24. I am Ling Yeting's woman. Wei Yang ran through all the possible people in his mind, and the answer was ready to come out. The coldness in the corner of her eyes became even worse, and she secretly put Ling Yeting's cell phone back. Ji Liang was temporarily called out to deal with matters in the club. Ling Yeting and Fu Motion were sitting together. They did not avoid her and were chatting about the cooperation between several companies. She had no intention of listening to this and went straight out of the private room, wanting to get some air. Before their busiest time, many people were already blushing from drinking. The music in the lobby was booming, and many people were twisting and dancing on the dance floor, venting their suppressed or manic emotions wildly. Hormones filled it, and desires were spilled all over the place. Wei Yang found a remote corner and sat down quietly, but suddenly she felt like she was being watched. She looked back and saw a young man staring at her, with no concealed sense of aggression in his eyes. His face was not handsome, but he was covered in bright colors, his appearance was bright and high profile, and the domineering look between his eyebrows could vaguely reveal his unusual identity. Someone caught her peeping on the spot. When he met her gaze, he not only did not avoid it, but instead took another glass of wine and walked forward with a smile. "Alone?" Although she had never seen him before, she, who had seen photos of everyone in the Ling family early in the morning, still recognized him at a glance. He was the son of Ling Yeting's aunt Ling Qianrui. Ling Yeting's aunt Ling Xinyu and her husband Jiang Xiangming were married into a daughter-in-law, so Ling Qianrui took her surname. She was full of the style of a wealthy daughter, and she was extremely domineering and arrogant in doting on Ling Qianrui. Ling Qianrui made a mistake before and was thrown abroad for several years. Unexpectedly, he came back. Wei Yan did not accept the wine from him, but smiled and said, "Thank you, Master Ling, for the wine. However, I have been feeling unwell in my stomach recently, so I'm afraid I will have to live up to Master Ling's kindness." Ling Qianrui's eyes looked at her without hesitation. Women are not different from other people of the same sex present, either coquettish or charming, they are all specially dressed. She was wearing a professional attire and looked tired. Nothing around her seemed to attract her attention. There was a bit of unconscious sexiness and beauty in her laziness. He had seen a lot of women, but he was attracted to her at a glance. He was not angry when he was rejected. Instead, he smiled and said, "Do you know me?" Wei Yan said politely, "Of course, I am Mr. Ling's secretary, and it is part of my job to recognize every face in the Ling family." Ling Qianrui raised his eyes and looked at Wei Yan with a different look. He said playfully, "So it's you." Wei Yan couldn't help but tighten her hands hanging by her side. She said calmly, "Then I won't disturb Mr. Ling. You can play slowly." Ling Qianrui said nothing, only looked at her with a smile. Wei Yan turned around and was about to leave, but as soon as he took a step forward, Ling Qianrui suddenly stretched out his hand, hugged Wei Yan's waist, came over and said with a smile, "Why are you so anxious? Since you are the secretary of our Ling family, come play with me, not just write." Wei Yan's expression changed drastically, and there was a warning in his tone, "Young Master Ling, please let go immediately. I am Ling Yeting's woman." Ling Qianrui smelled strongly of alcohol, and his tone was thick. "What's wrong with his woman? Do you think I'm afraid of moving him out? She's his woman, so it's fun to play with." He laughed playfully and came over to guard Yang. Wei Yan was so disgusted by the smell of alcohol on his breath that she turned her head and almost vomited. She struggled hard and raised her hand to take off his arm. Before she could take action, someone suddenly grabbed her arm. Wei Yan looked back and saw Ling Yeting appearing at some unknown time. With a strong force, he grabbed her wrist and kicked Ling Qianrui in the chest. He was merciless at all, and Ling Qianrui screamed and was kicked 2 or 3 meters away. Ling Qianrui was so angry that he yelled, "Who dares to kick me if they don't care about their life?" Ling Yeting looked down at him condescendingly, the evil look on his face almost making people dare not approach him. "Why do I want to fight back?